Okay, so let's go back to the reason that you were there. John Huntsman, that you were in Armenia. John Huntsman had built this cement plant, needed people to run it.
Not a cement plant. This was a precast concrete plant. So we didn't produce cement. We produced concrete panels using cement.
Ah,
Okay. Being
six
very
of one, half dozen of
picky.
the other. Okay.
It's like saying when you talk about a cement sidewalk, it isn't a cement sidewalk, it's a concrete sidewalk. You don't talk about a loaf of flour, you talk about a loaf of bread, because bread is more than just flour, right?
Right.
Concrete's more than just cement. So cement is one ingredient in concrete. Okay, so anyway, put in this precast concrete plant for making concrete panels that are used in construction over there. And it's a Western technology. They also produced concrete planks there, but they were not as good, and they were very jealous of the fact that they put these new planks in, but that's what the government wanted. Anyway.
So you taught engineering before you went to the.
Okay, so when we got called, one of my associates at the University of California was an American Armenian, and he was instrumental, along with several others, in starting this university over in Armenia called the American University of Armenia. And it was primarily a graduate school, and it was primarily in engineering and business. That was the two areas that they were primarily interested in to start off with. So when I got this call, I went to Armin Durkaragian is his name, and I'd said the church is sending me to Armenia, and what the reason, he was so shocked he couldn't believe it hardly. But anyway, he said, well, then he asked me, he said, would you be able to help us out there at the university? And I said, well, imagine so. So I sent a letter to the brethren.
So Cal had so was Cal, was this like a sister university or something? How was Cal associated with the American?
They were kind of sponsored it a little bit,
Okay.
but it was started by a number of American Armenians, mostly engineering people. Armin Durkaragian, there was a man at University of Southern California, an engineer, very prominent American Armenian, several others back east, and they all went together, and then they put this school together, this university together over there. That's what they wanted to do, and so they started it. And so when we got there that year, they would just started having classes. So Armin asked me if I would teach a couple of classes there while I was there. And so I asked the brethren, and they said, yeah, go ahead. Whatever you can, PR work you can do is fine. And so I just volunteered my time that year.
What was the temperature in your classroom?
Oh, 0 or
Wow.
We had no
10
heat.
degrees. There's
There
no
was
heat in the
Celsius.
building.
You can
And
never
this
get
was in the
Celsius?
spring.
Celsius or Fahrenheit?
Celsius or Fahrenheit. It was
It was-
you had your coats on and your
And your
everything
ice
on in
cold
the
all the
classroom. I mean,
And that was normal in the university.
in the winter, they had no heat. They didn't have any more heat than we
No
did.
people anywhere had any heat, is what we're trying to tell you.
Oh my gosh, how can people learn like that?
I don't know. Anyway,
You just do what you gotta do, I guess.
Teeth chattering.
yeah. Anyway,
Professor, speak up a little. I can't hear you over my teeth chattering.
So anyway, I would go up and teach a class, and then I would usually catch the streetcar and go out to the plant, and then work the rest of the day out there when I could, when it wasn't closed, when it was warm enough we could work out there, and otherwise I just go back to the apartment. But so I taught that spring semester classes, and then anyway, John Huntsman, the concrete plant. So they took an old plant that had been used for some kind of concrete production, and refurbished it so that it would take the equipment that was necessary for this precasting equipment. So then John bought all that precast concrete equipment out of a company in Milwaukee that ran a company. It's called Spancrete. And so he bought all the equipment, and they shipped it to Armenia, actually by air. One of those great, huge Russian transports came over and picked up that equipment and air freighted it over there to Armenia.
What was John Huntsman's reasoning?
He helps everybody in
Well-
trouble.
Well, it started out this way. How he got involved in it is that he is in the petrochemical business.
Right.
So he makes styrofoam. That's how he got started making styrofoam. But he's in the petrochemical business. Do you know the name Arm & Hammer?
Yeah.
You use baking soda and all his other stuff for whatever it is. Well, Arm & Hammer is a socialist. He's an industrialist, but he's a socialist. And he was in big time with the Russians. So when the earthquake struck, he knew John Huntsman very well. And so he calls up John, he says, you got to do something and help out these people in Armenia. He says, they're really, with this earthquake, it's really bad over there and they need help. So that's when he said, okay. And so he loaded up his plane with medical supplies and everything he could take, flew it over there, dropped that off, came home, took it about 3 or 4 trips of medical equipment for them over there.
So this was 100% humanitarian
Oh, yeah.
on the part of John
Oh,
Huntsman.
yeah. And then the church also sent in food and other supplies at the same time, humanitarian supplies. At that just after the earthquake there to help out. And so that's how John got in there with them. And so when they said we need some more Western building technology, they came up with this precast system. And so that's what they proposed. The government said, yeah, that'd be great. Why don't you do that? So it was a collaboration between John Huntsman and the Ministry of Construction that this plant was put in. It was a sort of joint venture, but John supplied all the money and all the equipment and all that stuff. And so at the time, John said, look, I'm going to send in some people to start up the plant and to train the people there to operate the plant. It won't cost anything, won't cost you anything. Of course, John Huntsman's father-in-law was Elder Haight, who was of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles at the time. So I'm sure he'd gone to the brethren and said, look, this is a good way for us to get missionaries into Russia, because at that time it was still the USSR. And they didn't have any missionaries in the USSR at the time. So then the church said, yeah, that would be fine. So then they called 6 couples to go in. 5 went in. We were the 5th one. The 6th couple, they came to the MTC, but something came up and they left. We don't know why. They just were there one day and they were gone the next day. We don't know why they left, but they left.
And they weren't replaced.
And they weren't replaced.
Okay.
So we were the first missionaries to ever go into Armenia. We started the church there. The man in charge of histories from Salt Lake came down, interviewed us. All that is written
After we
up
came home from our mission.
All
Right.
that is written up in church history, how Armenia got the gospel.
Wow.
And each couple held church in their own apartment. At
When we-
first we met in one apartment, all of us. And let's see, the elder from Frankfurt, no, it wasn't Nunswander came over.
I
Said
guess
we
it
had
was-
to all meet separately or it wouldn't grow. So that's why we all separated. And
Makes sense.
we had, like I said, our room pretty full.
The first Sunday we met as a group in our apartment, we had 7 people there. There were like 4 Americans and 3 Armenians. And when we left, the Sunday we left, when Tad was there, the Sunday we left, we had over 70 people in our apartment.
How'd you fit them in there?
They're like sardines in a can.
They wanted to tell us goodbye, and
Oh.
We had over 70 people in that apartment. It was just jammed in like sardines.
now today, missionaries are going over there. A lady in our ward, her grandson went over, and then she had 2 other, a grandson and a granddaughter, also serve in Armenia.
Wow.
And there's one mission over there, and it includes Armenia and the country Georgia, the
And
neighboring
Azerbaijan.
country. And
So 3
Azerbaijan.
countries.
Yeah. But
So-
there's not much missionary work done in Azerbaijan because they're mostly Muslims.
And they're not allowed.
They're not allowed to do that there
So
amongst the Muslims.
didn't the university what's it called? The American University of Armenia. Didn't they ask you back a year
Yeah.
later?
So after we came home, and then that next spring
That was
they
in
asked me.
93.
So 93 we came home. So 94 they asked me to go back in 94 and teach the spring semester in 94. So we went back and were there another 3.5 months or something, like one semester. And then in 95 they asked me to go back again. So we went back again for that same spring semester again. And I taught a couple of classes each time.
Okay, and then you went to Gyumri one time.
Okay, then in 1999, John Huntsman called up and said, I'm going to do a humanitarian project up in Gyumri, which was a city about 65 miles north of the capital where he'd lived before, Yerevan. And so they sent a guy down and we talked and about what it was. And so I was in the bishopric at the ward here, and we talked to the bishop, and Carol was the Relief Society president, and said, they want us to go. Well, that's when we went to teach. So no, but I was the high priest group leader when they called me, when John Huntsman called me. Anyway, we said, yes, we'll go. So it was another year and a half, at least a year and a half to go over there to be the project manager on this humanitarian project. And what he wanted to do is he was going to build a school plus an apartment, a village of apartments for about 300 apartments in a small complex there.
And he gave all of this.
Well, the agreement was with the government was that he was loaning them $10 million to do this for 10 years at no interest. Wow. So we go over, and the first thing they wanted to do is to get the school built, because the schools, and Carol can talk to you about the schools, but the schools were in shambles. The earthquake had just devastated the schools over there. So they had schools in containers and in old buildings. The Germans had gone in and refurbished one building and had a German school or a school. The English had gone in, British had gone in and put a school in. Refurbished a building and put a school in, and they wanted John to do the same. So that's what we did. The first thing we got going on was this school. There was after the earthquake, the Russians put in some money to start refurbishing these areas that had been devastated. And the area that we were going to build this apartment in had been a garment or a textile plant, a big textile plant. And so they tore everything out of there and they started to rebuild an office complex for this textile plant. And then the USSR collapsed. So they just stopped. Crane was still sitting there. They didn't take it down. They didn't take anything. It was a reinforced concrete building. The forms were still on the building on the top part. They hadn't even taken the forms off the walls where they were pouring concrete when they quit. They just one day just quit and walked away from the job. So we were to take
They weren't getting paid anymore.
Yeah, we were to take that building and redesign it and make a school out of it. They didn't want to tear it down. They wanted to keep that building, but they wanted to make a school out of it. Well, which was the wrong thing. We should have just tore it down and started over again. But nonetheless, we did. And you can take a picture of it. It's on my wall downstairs in the office there. You can see the school when we got it done. Anyway, so we worked. That was the first thing we did. We did that, and then we started the design of the apartments.
When they finished the school, John Huntsman flew over and went to Yerevan and picked up the President Kacharian, the president of Armenia, and then they flew up to Gyumri, and they had a program presentation there at the school, and outside
Ribbon cutting opening.
And John Huntsman is talking, and he said, well, where are the Stevens? Where are the Stevens? And so we stepped forward, and this one lady in English said, I love you. That made us feel pretty bad. But then when John and the president went through the school, they went into a classroom, and the desks are double, 2 students to a big desk. And they sat down at the desk together and said, we're the first students to sit in the school.
It's neat.